Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Borison, editor of Your Teen Media, and I'm so excited to be here with Phyllis Fagel. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi.
You guys
Thanks
are
for
gonna,
having me.
you guys are going to love Phyllis Fagel. She's a therapist at the Chrysalis Group and a counselor at a school in Washington, D.C. Phyllis is also the author of Middle School Matters. And you've also worked in high school, right?
I have.
Right.
I
So
started out actually as a school counselor in high schools.
excellent. So you have the whole span of what we're going to talk about today, and we're really happy to have you here. The topic we're going to address today, it's kind of that thing that lays over everything we talk about, but nobody really does this with it and hits it head on. But we come to parenting with our own personalities, flawed, perfect, excellent, whatever we come with, we bring it with us. And so when we're getting advice from professionals, a lot of it doesn't quite address the fact that we might come with flaws that impact parenting that isn't best practices. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and Phyllis is going to give us some advice about what we can do to pull back away from our own past and be the best parent we could be. We are going to start with just what's the best piece of advice you want to give to parents of teenagers?
So just like adults, teenagers would prefer that people focus on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. And so the best piece of advice that I would give parents is to focus on the relationship first and check that impulse to criticize, to judge, to make that snide or snarky comment that you rationalize by saying it's helpful or it's protective, because really at the end of the day, you're going to be able to help them much more if they're open to talking to you about what's really going on in their life. So focusing on their strength at least 80% of the time will go very, very far in preserving the relationship.
And if we just take a second to think of ourselves, like it's just human nature, right? Like we
Definitely.
Yeah. So
We're human beings too. We have flaws, we have weaknesses. We would rather fixate on what we're good at.
Yeah, I'm a mom and I'm a human being, right? Let's start with that. So let's start out with the question that parents come at parenting with so much anxiety today. Like there's so many expectations on us, and there's a sense that there's a right way to do it, even though you know that there's not, and I know that there's not. But I'm at the other end of parenting. I didn't know that when I had my first kid turn adolescent and turn into a species I didn't understand. And so I was very anxious, as I think many parents are in that stage. So what do we do when our own emotion is revving up like what already is a tough time for our kids?
I think the best thing you can do is just recognize that, first of all, to acknowledge when you're in a heightened state of emotion. One of the greatest phrases I heard about parenting is that our job is to be the thermostat and not the thermometer. So as their temperature rises up and down, we want to be the one who is actually setting what the temperature is going to be. And sometimes we really need to take extra steps and precautions in order to be a good thermostat. So if you know that you're anxious, if you know that something is triggering you, you might need to process with a friend or with a partner before you have that discussion with your child. You don't need to have a knee-jerk reaction right away. And if you're really struggling, you might want to consider getting some therapy to work on whatever your own issues are. But on a daily basis, what we really want to be doing is making sure that we are acknowledging that we are vulnerable and that we have our own needs for self-care and that we're doing whatever it takes to put on our own oxygen mask so we can be that non-anxious presence for our kids. Because the reality is that life is stressful and that emotions are contagious. And so the more we can do to stay even, the more likely our kids will be able to self-regulate themselves.
So that always makes me think of, the parenting moment I would do a takeover on, which was my oldest in middle school when something would happen socially, and I would respond with, "They said what?" I would have this adolescent middle school girl reaction to my kids, and I don't think I knew for a long time that was not helping her.
It's so instinctive, though, to put on a poker face when your child is emotional and when you're feeling their pain and when you're feeling emotional with them or when you're feeling outraged for them. It is so hard to keep that, even look on your face, because they are studying everything, our tone, our body language, how we're reacting. Even if we don't say the wrong things, we can do the wrong things. We can turn our body away. We can look like we're not listening. It's very, very hard, especially with younger teens, to convey that we care, but that we're not judging or criticizing. That it's such a fine line when we're interacting with them.
So how to, like, do you meet with parents also in school?
I do.
So how do you advise a parent who comes in and tells you what they think is the most tragic story, that there's a party and their kid wasn't invited, and they're coming in with all of their baggage of having once been a middle school kid who probably also, because we all did, got left out of parties. So how do you advise that parent?
So those are the situations that are the hardest for parents to take a step back, because it is so painful to see your child suffering in that way. But that is such a good example of a situation where you want to be there to support them. You don't want to be there to fix anything for them. Now, there are situations where it rises to the next level. Maybe a child is getting seriously bullied, or maybe there's reputational damage because something has been posted online that could have long-term repercussions. I'm not saying parents should never get involved, but for the normal bumps and bruises of adolescence, and you said it yourself, we've all been there. We have all not been invited to a party at some point or another. The way you learn how to handle those situations, the way we become adults who understand that you don't get invited to everything and that's okay, is by weathering those. So our job as parents is just to be there for them, by their side, to say, that sucks and I feel for you, and how can I help you, or how can I distract you? But we cannot fix it for them, and we cannot make that pain go away entirely. And if you do bring your own issues, if you have those horrible, middle school memories, and you remember not feeling particularly accepted and it's triggering something for you, sometimes I think it's okay to say, you know what, I might not be the right person to really get in there on this particular issue. This might be something that I should outsource to my partner, or to their aunt, or to somebody else who could really be the first line of support for my child, because I'm just not in a space where I'm going to be the person I want to be for them right now.
And do you think kids are good with that? Like, they hear you say, does it come across as dismissive, or is it's okay?
I think if you do it in an authentic way, if you say, this is bringing up stuff for me, I think number one, you're normalizing that this happens. Number two, you are demonstrating that it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to ask for help. Number three, it's okay to feel wounded and to have real feelings and to express them. And I do think you want to take that next step if you do say that to your child, and say, but you know what, I'm okay, and here's what I did to be able to deal with those situations, and here's how I handle them now. So you don't necessarily want to convey the message that this is something they'll suffer from for life, but I think it's very helpful to normalize it and to say that you have had that same experience yourself.
So I could see saying it, and with some of my kids getting like having them feel better about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of my kids having that, like, I don't really care because I'm not, right?
Well, they may not care, but you've put it out there, and they may not hear you at that moment or care at that moment, but they might retrieve that memory or remember that you said that to them 2 years later. Maybe they don't care when they're 14, but when they're 17 and it happens again, or when they're 19 and they're in college and it happens again, they'll remember, I remember my mother said that this happened to her and that it happens to everybody. And she really learned how to pick good friends from that a situation or from that circumstance, and this is how it benefited her in the long run.
I do love the idea of having another person in your life that you kind of hand them off to when you're not the best person.
Definitely. I have a friend who all of her friends are either Tia or Tio, everybody's an aunt or an uncle, and she will outsource to various aunts or uncles certain issues, like, oh, this is the one who she needs to talk to when she got in a car accident and I'm too mad to talk to her about it, but I want her to process this with somebody, or this is the person she should talk to when she failed a test and I'm going to blow it out of proportion. So I do think it's important to have other kids in your child's life. The more adults in their life that they know care about them and love them, the better.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That just works just as a concept, right? Like, not to have to, first of all, it relieves me as a mother of having to be the person who knows everything, which of course none of us do, and don't necessarily have the right temperament for each of the issues that are going to come up, which leads nicely to the next thing. So our own goals and struggles can weigh into, no pun intended, because one of the examples is weight, but if we were particularly organized and we have a kid who's terribly unorganized, those kind of examples where it's not how you envisioned it, right? Like we have a baby, we think about molding them into some fashion of who we are, or a better version of who we are. And then it turns out that the athletic mother has the non-athletic kid, or whatever it is. So, you know, what do we do with our emotions in that kind of disappointment, right? Like we envisioned something else. How do we how do we deal with that?
So I think you need to know yourself. I think self-awareness is so important in our kids, but it's also important in ourselves. So you used weight as an issue. So if, for example, you know that that's a hot button issue for you, that you struggled with weight, and that you know you really need to check yourself when you're talking to your child and not make comments that are going to be damaging, like, are you sure you want a second helping, or whatever it is that you're tempted to say out of a place of love, out of a place of protectiveness, and really what you're doing is putting onto them some issues that you're carrying forward with you. If you know that that's something that you're struggling with, that's an excellent example of a situation where you're just not going to want to be the first line of support. You're going to want to outsource that, because you're not going to be able to help them develop the right attitude toward food. Now, on the flip side, you know, that's a situation where maybe you're over-identifying. But on the flip side, there might be a situation where you just cannot relate at all. So if you were a wonderful student, a straight A student, and everything came easily to you, or you were so great socially and had at ease in conversation and were the life of every party, and you have a child who's struggling with learning challenges, or you have a child who is painfully shy and has a really hard time making friends, you're not naturally going to be able to understand their struggle. And in those situations, you need to, you know, really take a moment and say to yourself, you know, what is it that I can relate to in this situation? What is it that I can't relate to? And educate yourself so that you can be a good support system for them, as opposed to dismissing what they're going through or just saying, I don't understand it. You know, everybody struggles with different things in life. You know, teens struggle with different things, adults struggle with different things, and odds are that your child is going to have some different struggles than you have yourself. And so building that empathy muscle and building that understanding is critical if we're going to be able to support them and help them accept themselves too.
I have a firstborn who's shy, and I'm not. And it took me so long to figure out that I wasn't supposed to teach her to not be shy. Like, I just thought if she did what I suggested, then it would all work. Don't retreat from the room, walk into the room, right? And I put such a burden on her shoulders because I really actually didn't know that that was a way of existing. I just didn't know that her composition was different than mine. So even though I could define myself as being outgoing, I couldn't see her as being shy. It didn't feel that way to me. It felt like she needed training.
That makes perfect sense. And if it makes you feel better, there is some benefit to the advice you gave her. It probably was just too much too soon. So all phobias respond, all anxieties, all phobias respond to exposure. It's why even the shyest kid might not seem shy as an adult, because over time they're forced to socialize and forced to practice those skills. So when I'm talking to parents who are working with kids who are excessively shy or who don't want to give a presentation in class or anything along those lines that's fear-based, what I tell them to work out with their kids is figure out where their fear lies on a scale of 1 to 10, and then ask them what would be in that 4 to 7 range. If they were to take a social risk, let's say, what would be in the 4 to 7 range? So maybe for your child, it would have been saying to a kid at school, oh, what do you do on the weekend? You know, for you, it might have been go straight to, hey, let's go to the movies this weekend, or do you want to come have a sleepover? They might need to build up to it. So just really honoring your kid for who they are and figuring out where that comfortable risk is, because if you overdo it too quickly, forevermore, their brain is going to send that, you know, fight or flight reflex, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. So it's not that you don't want them to take those risks or take those steps toward things that you know are important but scary. It's that you need to do it at a pace and at a rate that they're comfortable with.
Can you say that again about the scale?
So when kids are afraid of doing something, when they perceive a risk involved, maybe it's trying out for a team that they want to be on, maybe it's trying out for a play, maybe it's inviting someone over to play, or taking a seat at a lunchroom table with kids they don't know very well, or giving a presentation in class. It could be anything. And I think that's key, that the idea that every kid is going to be afraid of different things, but every kid will be afraid of something. It just won't necessarily be the same things that their parents, found scary. So what I like to do with kids is to first have them rate their fear on a scale of 1 to 10. Is talking in front of the class, is that a 9? Is it a 4? And let's say they say it's so off the scale, you know, it's a 10. It's impossible. It's not something that I can manage at all. I will work out with them what is a risk in the 4 to 7 range. And I've had students say lots of different things over the years. It could be that they want to read their presentation without looking up. It could be that they want to do it for a few friends. I even had one kid who wanted to do it in the bathroom behind the stall door for a couple of friends who were standing outside the bathroom stall door while I stood there and watched this all unfold. And it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it really wasn't. The idea is that you want them to get some exposure, because all fears, all anxieties, all phobias respond to exposure. And so even those little baby steps, as long as we do it at a pace that's comfortable for our child, we'll get them there eventually, or we'll get them there wherever their temperament will allow them to go. But the key thing is not to push them too far, too fast, because then forevermore their amygdala is going to be screaming, you know, that fight or flight response, and they'll be imprinted that this is something to avoid, that this is something too scary to try.
I love how collaborative that is. It's like recognizing that the kid knows too that this is hard and can evaluate where it is on the scale. Like, it's just such an easy add-on to what I never would have thought of. So I want to read you.
I'm sure you did it great.
No, I really love that idea. Like, actually, instead of assessing it ourselves, bringing the kid in to assess it with you, and they will have an opinion. They know.
They do know, and I think that is something that we as parents get wrong a lot. We assume that we know best. You know, we're so busy teaching them instead of relating to them. You know, we're trying to bring them into our world and make sure they know everything we know so that we can protect them from all pain and, you know, wrap them in bubble wrap. But the truth is that they know themselves better than anyone else, and they know themselves better than we know them. And so if we don't invite them in to problem solve with us, then we can't complain when the solutions we impose on them don't work, because they're not going to work if they're not collaborative.
That's awesome. Okay, the next one is so hard to do. Trust our kids. And not because we think they're going to be awful people, but just because what if we're wrong, right? Like, what if we extend trust in situations only to find out that we made an error of judgment there? So what do you do with that?
Well, the good news is research shows that when parents start from a place of trust and when they have high expectations and convey those high expectations, kids are likely to rise to the trust we put on them. The research also shows that they will fall if we have little trust in them. So I think we want to default to a place of trust. So if your kid is generally where they say they're going to be, and if they're mostly following the rules and doing what they're supposed to do, and all kids are going to veer off course just a little bit, I think we do want to maintain that trust and loosen the reins and give them more freedom rather than less, err on the side of giving them more freedom. And I also think about it in terms of the gift that we're giving them. So if we are micromanaging their every move, then we are conveying to them that we don't trust that they can handle it on their own. And I personally think the greatest gift we can give a child is that they're self-sufficient, that they're able to manage their way through the world and to handle whatever is thrown at them. So I think that starting from a place of trust is critical. And kids, especially middle schoolers, understand the difference between us getting in there when it's safety versus something really intrusive and personal. So if we are asking them what time they're planning to be home, or we're asking them whose house they're going to, or we're calling someone's house to find out if it's a supervised party, kids tend to accept that and understand that that's all right and that's something we can do. If we're prying about who they have a crush on or who's dating who, that's really none of our business. If they want to share it, they can, but that's where they start to pull back and draw the line. The metaphor that I love is from Dr. Ken Ginsberg. He's a developmental pediatrician at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and he uses a puzzle metaphor. So he says to imagine a puzzle, and if you picture the image on the top of the box, that's us. We are the role models, and kids are modeling themselves after us. And then when you start to put the puzzle together, you start with the edges, and all those pieces on the edges represent the boundaries of safety. So you don't want them going beyond those edges because that's where it's unsafe. But all the pieces in the middle, which generally tend to be things like school, almost everything that is school related or extracurricular related, grades related, would fall into those middle pieces. Anything that's a middle piece of the puzzle, that's where we need to back off. That's where we need to let them fail and bounce back and just have us be there as their support.
That's great. That's such a good visual.
I love it too.
So the place that it muddies for me is the technology piece that is new for us, and even changing all the time. So if it used to be that we would say if you wouldn't read your kid's diary, then you probably wouldn't monitor your kid. But people who've lived through terrible stories in terms of social media, bullying, and just physical harm, they feel like you should be monitoring every keystroke. So how do we balance that?
I fall somewhere in between on that. I think as kids are getting involved with social media, and I think we do have to accept that it's not going anywhere. It is a part of their life. And so it's not about us figuring out which apps they have or what they need to be doing on each app, but really the main thing for me is teaching them how to be safe online, and also how to teach them to be a decent human being online, to act civilly offline and online. But with technology use, I do think, particularly with middle schoolers, as they're getting introduced to it, we need to be there. We need to be teaching them. We need to be at least spot checking. We need to be setting time limits and not sending that phone into the bedroom with them, and making sure that it's not on while they're trying to do homework and they're just going to toggle inefficiently between the phone and the social media. I'm a big fan of waiting as long as possible before putting kids on some of those social media sites. I know you were talking about how you want to do over with your kids. I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old, and my 11-year-old is already complaining that I'm treating him completely differently in the social media realm than I treated my older two, because we've learned so much even in the last 5 years. So my older two, it was kind of what you were saying. I really just sort of let them go, and I let them have a phone in 7th grade. With my youngest, I'm putting it off at least until 8th. I'm not letting him use any social media. So that's just a personal decision. I'm not saying that that's what everybody should be doing, and also I probably see too much as a school counselor. So I have my own anxieties around it. But for the most part, I do think that we need to teach them very deliberately, very intentionally how to use it, and help them understand that they need limits around their use of social media as well.
So how do you balance that with trust? Like, how does the conversation look between parent and teen when the best approach is trust, but we've got these devices that are like driving a car, right? Like, you've got to do something with it.
Yeah, I think that it's, inspect what you expect, so you set the guidelines, you tell them what you expect them to do online, you expect them to act civilly, you expect them to treat people respectfully, you expect them to abide by your rules. And you start from that place of trust that they're doing all of that and, under the while you're still spot checking. I no longer spot check my older teens. They're at a point where I trust that they know what they're doing and they're not getting in trouble on there, knock wood. But I trust them because they've proven that they can be trustworthy. And I did start from a place of trust with them as well. And I'll do the same with my younger one. When he starts going online, I'll be on there with him and I will be spot checking. But after a while, once I think that he knows that he has it under control and he understands what it means to set privacy settings and to be safe and to be civil, I will back off and I'll just keep removing that scaffolding, spending less time sitting next to him and less time spot checking. I joke about my oldest child. When he got a phone, for some reason, the phone was sending all of his texts to my iPad. They were just coming rapid fire, and they were, not appropriate because you're talking about these group text chains with lots of teen boys. And so you can imagine the kinds of things that they're saying. And I went to him and I said, I think you don't want me getting these texts and I don't know how to undo it. I'm not technical at all. So help me figure this out. He's like, no, it's fine. I don't care. And I said, well, I think your friends will care that I'm getting these texts. I think we should stop this. And besides, it's annoying. And he just kind of blew it off. He really didn't care. And then a couple years later, suddenly I stopped getting those texts on my iPad. And that's when I briefly started checking his phone again, just to make sure, because I thought it was interesting that suddenly they disappeared. So I joke with him about that now. I think he just had reached a phase where he was more private, but every kid is going to be different and every kid is going to need different amounts of policing. If you have a particularly impulsive child or a kid who has ADHD and is known for being impulsive socially in normal human interactions, face-to-face interactions, they're probably going to behave similarly online. They're probably going to need more supervision than a less impulsive child.
In the irony of ironies, we hit perimenopause and menopause as women as often at the same time that our daughters are going through puberty, and our sons. And that's like a joke. It's like a bad joke, right? Like we're dealing with our own nonsense that we have no ability to control at the same time that they're going through the exact same thing.
It's so true. I have a friend who is going through perimenopause, and she was saying, we have all of these books that we can read about teens to help us manage them, but someone has to write a book for our teens about how to manage your mothers when they're going through perimenopause or going through menopause, because it is a cruel joke that their hormones, as their hormones are going in one direction and yours are going in another. But that goes back to what we talked about early on in this conversation, that we are the thermostat, we are the adult, and so we need to do whatever we have to do to be a non-anxious presence, to make sure that we're practicing that self-care so that we don't bring whatever those mood fluctuations are to the relationship we have with our child. Because from what I understand it turns out there are hundreds of articles written about this. A surprising number of people are really fascinated by what it means to go through perimenopause as your daughter or son is going through puberty. But for parents, a lot of women, when they are going through perimenopause, suddenly lose that hold back the anger switch. And so it could be much more combative if you're not careful and if you have that particular side effect of perimenopause.
So what are some of the suggestions when you talk about self-care? Like what, just give a few examples of what parents could, because even though we're going to hear it from you and go, oh, of course, we've forgotten. We need a reminder.
It's so true. I gave a presentation at a school to parents, and the presentation was on helping them help their children with anxiety. And I gave all kinds of tips for mindfulness and meditation and exercise and music. I went through all of these things. And at the end, every single question from the parents in the audience, men and women, was the same. But what if I'm a mess? What if I can't manage anxiety? What if I try exercising and it doesn't work? Or what if I'm constantly losing my cool, or I'm just always worrying about something? How can I help my child if I can't even do it myself? And it really stuck with me how many people had that question and how many people struggle with that. So number one, parents are so quick to get therapy for their kids often, which is great. Therapy is almost always helpful, but don't forget that you can get it for yourself too if you're struggling, if that's something that you think might help you. Another thing that parents can do is just simply have that self-awareness of when they need to take a step back. Maybe this isn't the right time to have this conversation with my child. Maybe this is a time when I need to just be honest and say, I need to go for a run, or I need to call a friend. You'll be modeling how they should do it themselves, and you'll be taking better care of yourself, and you'll be much more likely to be able to return to the relationship with your child in a more productive and constructive way. But I think what happens is once we're in the moment with our kid, it's very, very hard for us to dial back. And another thing parents can do, it's somewhat tangential, but we can anticipate what it is that our kids might confide in us. It could be anything. It could be regarding their sexuality, regarding their gender, regarding a grade, or regarding failing a test. It could be anything that we think might be a trigger for us, or something that we would need time for processing. And just in advance, think about how you might respond, so that in the moment you handle it the way you would like to handle it.
Oh, if only. Those are great tips. There are moments where we're clear enough to be able to say we need self-care. And then there's moments where we're just not at our best. So what's the retreat on that one? What do you do there?
I'm big on apologizing, or coming back to a kid and saying, I lost my cool and I'm really sorry. I feel bad. I wanted to be calm, and I wanted to really be able to listen to you in a different kind of way. And can I press the reset button? Can we try again? And just being honest with them. You're also then modeling how to make it right with somebody, how to repair damage, to repair harm, and you're holding yourself accountable. And I think that's such a hard skill. And even modeling how to apologize. So many kids don't know how to make a proper apology, and that's a skill that they will take with them for life. So we are going to make mistakes. We are going to yell. We are going to lose our cool. We're going to be too anxious when we most want to be that non-anxious presence. We're going to push them too hard, too far. We're going to do all of those mistakes, but just taking a step back and saying, okay, here's what I wish I had done differently. Here's where I feel like I went in the wrong direction, but I'd really appreciate it if you would give me another chance, if we could press the reset button and start over.
I love it, because aspirationally, we all strive to be the best parent we can be, but practically things get in the way. And so acknowledging that here's best practices. Well, best practices is that we're never moody, but that's not going to happen when we're going through menopause. And then the next best thing is to take care of ourselves. And then when neither of those happen, to apologize.
Exactly.
It's such great advice. How do we parent without judgment? There's very little that I can say to my kids that they don't feel like comes loaded, and I want to be able to do it.
You're making me think of a comment that the writer Rachel Simmons has made, which is that kids, and girls in particular, are famous for hearing criticism as yelling. And I think that we have to be very careful about how many times we make the same comment. So if a comment is loaded, and we know what that is, it could be, for me, my daughter hates it when I tell her to sit up straight, I know, and I try to check myself before I know, now I'm going to sit up straight. I try to check myself before I say it, because I know no good is going to come from that comment. All it's going to do is be inflammatory. It's not something that I haven't said before. It's not worth the damage it will do. But if I even look at her in a way that to her reads as sit up straight, it will have the exact same effect as my saying, stand up straight or whatever it might be. And it doesn't really matter if my motivation is for her to take up space in the world, not just to look better. She just hears it straight up as criticism. So I think we need to be very, very conscious of the tone we're using, of how often we make certain comments, of the body language we have, of whether or not it's something that we know is something that they're hard on themselves about already. And just taking a pause, just taking 10 seconds. It's the same advice I give to kids before they post online. I say, just take 10 seconds, sit on your hands if you have to, before you make a post, because as a young teen, you are going to be impulsive. So build in a little bit of reaction time. Same thing with criticism. I tell parents, just take 10 seconds before you make that comment and decide whether or not it's worth it before you make it.
But we think we're being helpful.
We do. We really, really think we're being helpful. We think we're being instructive. We think that we're sparing them some pain. We think that we're in some way bettering them. But this goes back to they are the expert in their own life. They're also living their own life, and they are going to make mistakes. They are going to do things differently than we would like them to do. And our default is to assume that we're right and they're wrong. But who are we to say that we know best? We don't have any proof that we know better than they do. So sometimes we need to just take a breath and stay, when in doubt, stay silent.
How does that work with taking risks, which is it's the discussion right now, how we've kind of suppressed the risk taking in adolescence and that it's harming our kids. How do we let our kids take risks? That's the worst.
The problem with risk taking is we say one thing and then we do another. So we'll say to our kids, let other people do the rejecting. You should put yourself out there. You should go after whatever you want. And then we see our son wanting to try out for that travel soccer team or whatever team it is that we really don't think he's going to make. And we find ourselves discouraging them or suggesting that maybe they would rather do rec or doing whatever we can to spare them that pain. And when we do that, we do them such a disservice, because even if we spare them that momentary pain, number one, we're assuming we're right. They may very well make the team. But even if we spare them that momentary pain, what we haven't taught them is how to come back from that disappointment. And in life, there is no way. We're not going to be walking around. I was listening to the Anne Lamott TED Talk about a similar topic about writing in life. And she says, we can't chase after our grown children with a can of sun spray, and chapstick. And so we have to start at some point letting them go and letting them take risks. And we want them to take risks because they will accomplish so much more in life and be so much truer to their own authentic selves and find their own happiness if we allow them to do that. I have a friend who has a 17-year-old son, and when he was about 14, starting when he was 14, he decided he wanted to spend his summers tracking wolves in the wilderness without a phone, without anything. It was there were a few guides that were going with these kids, but basically she had to decide if she was comfortable letting her son go into the wilderness at age 14 to literally track wolves where she wouldn't be able to talk to him for weeks on end. And what she said to me was that she ultimately decided that the greater gift she could give him was to say that she trusted him, that she trusted that he knew himself, that he knew what his limits were, that he knew what would bring him happiness. And she still is super anxious. He's now 17. He's still tracking wolves, but she really is glad that she just took that breath and allowed him to do what felt right for him as opposed to what would have felt right for her.
Man, that's brave. I don't know if I could do that. I had a kid play football and so many people gave us flack for that. How can you let your kid do that?
I hear you. I have my 11-year-old is already preparing me that he will be playing football and I may as well just start getting used to it now. And I'm struggling with it too.
Yeah, but the reality is it was the height of his high school career. Like he lived and breathed it. He loved it. So to have taken that away, I mean, it is all hindsight. He's healthy and fine, but a lot of people made comments to us.
Well, and I think that's the key thing, recognizing that it's our anxiety. Just because we're anxious doesn't mean that we are being bad parents by letting them do something. So sometimes we are, sometimes we do want to make sure that we're keeping them safe and keeping them out of trouble. But for the most part, kids are just fine and they're resourceful. I tell the story of my own son when he was in 8th grade. He was 14. He went on a school trip to China, and they had flown for a very long time. They were tired. They went to the Great Wall when they arrived. They went out to dinner. They got back on the bus. The bus went to the hotel. The kids went to sleep. Everybody thought everything was fine. At 2 a.m, my son woke up on a locked bus somewhere in a remote parking lot in Beijing by himself with no phone and nobody there. And had I known, I'm sure I would have been freaking out that he was in that situation, but he figured it out. He figured out how to crack open the window. He figured out how to yell until somebody heard him. He then was able to say police, and somebody called the police, and the police came and got him off the bus and brought him to the station. And he's quite the memories of the police station in Beijing. But now when parents tell me I have to get my kid a cell phone, what if they don't make it to their friend's house? I always tell them the story of my son on the locked bus in the remote lot in Beijing in China, because what I learned from that is kids will figure it out. For the most part, they will figure it out. We are far more protective than we need to be. That's an extreme example, but it's a true example.
Yes, until it's not, right? Until someone has a bad ending. Like, there's nothing better than being on the other side of the story and saying, oh, I love that my kid played football.
That's true. That's true. But life is risky. Every time our kid gets in a car, it's risky. So everything is weighing the pros and cons and also factoring in their feelings about it. And I think playing a sport or going on a school trip, there are certain things that are different in nature than other risks. Like if your kid said that they wanted to ride an electric scooter across town without a helmet, then I would say, no, don't allow them to do that. So there's teaching your kids what the difference is between a healthy risk or a safe risk and an unwise risk, I think, is part of the teaching piece of parenting.
Yeah, like, to me, it's always put the seatbelt on when you can.
Exactly.
Whatever situation you are.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to end with this question. If our listeners leave with one piece of advice, what would you like them to remember?
That's a really good question. And I think I'm going to say that the best piece of advice I would give is to allow your child to be exactly who they are. So this is kind of the theme of our whole conversation. How do we set aside our own anxieties? How do we set aside who we are versus who they are? What if we are a good student and they're not? Or what if we are not a risk taker and they are, or vice versa? And the kids who struggle the most, and I see this in private practice, I see this in the school setting, the kids who have the hardest time navigating adolescence, navigating the teen years, are the ones who feel like they can't be who they really are, that there is a gulf between who their parents want them to be or who their parents expect them to be and who they think of themselves as being. So if we can just be very clear with our kids, and I'm all for saying this outright, just letting them know, whatever happens, whatever mistakes you make, whoever you are, whatever your identity is, I love you and I'm here and I'm a consistent presence and I'm an unwavering presence. And that's all I want to be, is a support for you. I'm not looking to change you in any way.
Wow. Well, that is really beautiful. and I don't even think that hard to say. So thank you for ending with that. Thank you all for being here with us. And thank you, Phyllis Fagel. That was amazing.